with Charles Darwin. He publishes The Origin of Species in 1859, and evolution is not a new concept. It goes all the way back to the 5th, 6th century BC with the Greeks that I'm aware of. And they had this idea of evolution, or things changing, going from simple to complex, or from one form to another. What was unique about Darwin's approach was his mechanism for evolution was purely materialistic, and it's called natural selection. And his idea was that due to environmental factors, certain traits would be more desirable or would help someone survive and be able to breed and replicate. Other traits would not be so helpful. And so those members of the species would probably die off, not get to pass off their genes, and so you get genetic drift. And Darwin went so far to believe that all life started as a single cell, and from that single cell, we get all the variations we see today. Now, his theory started as kind of like a ladder approach, from single cell going up to like multi-celled organisms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, all the way up to the primates and then humans. So you get kind of like this ladder approach of evolution. But now evolution is much more like a tree, right? The tree of life, where you have different branches going off, and with each one you get diverse speciation. And these changes occur through mutation. So if you ever had a litter of puppies or kittens, there's a range, right? There's usually a runt, and there's usually one bigger than the others. Some might have short fur, some might have long fur, some might be white, others might be multicolored. And the idea with natural selection is, let's take the Arctic hare, for example. Arctic hares have adapted over time to having white color fur for camouflage because they're living in a snowy environment. They have really short ears to save body heat, and there's fur on the bottom of their feet for insulation against the snow and ice. Now, it's still a hare. You could breed it with a jackrabbit, and I believe they could produce viable offspring. But a jackrabbit has adapted to a very different environment. It is also a hare, but it lives in the deserts. And so its ears are huge because its ears are actually working like a radiator or a cooler, and its skin is brown, so it blends in with its desert environment, and it has really long legs and rapid speed by which to avoid predators. And so even though these are both hares, the different environments through natural selection has chosen certain traits that aid in survival, and the ones that don't have those traits, they're not making babies, so they're not passing on their genes. Was that a clear enough, quick explanation of natural selection? Okay, through mutation? Good. And once again, this is an incredibly logical, rational theory based on observation. And I don't even know of any creationists, even young Earth creationists, that disagree with adaptation through mutation. I don't think that's what's in dispute here. What's in dispute is like one kind or one species changing into another kind or species. That's where the debate's happening, not that mutation's taking place and that adaptation is taking place. So Darwin is pitching this naturalistic view where we no longer need a god or something supernatural, but everything is coming through simply the choices of nature. And part of how he came to this in the 19th century, for these intellectual scholar gentlemen, a lot of them raised pigeons, and they would breed pigeons. I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties of pigeons. There's tumblers, there's homing pigeons, there's pigeons for eating, there's pigeons for eggs, there's messenger pigeons. There's all these different types of fancy breeds of pigeons that these scholar intellects would do as like a hobby. And Darwin began to speculate, if we could get this kind of variety in just a couple hundred years through purposeful selection, what could nature do if given vast amounts of time? And that's how he like worked backwards to, we all could have come from the same source, given enough time and enough mutation. Okay, we also at this time period start to get some theists or Christians trying to reconcile Darwinian evolution with the Holy Scriptures. And this is where we get things like theistic evolution, where there's a belief in a God, but God has used evolution as his means to bring about the diversity of creatures in the world today. And that's actually probably the majority position among at least scholars in even evangelical circles. Now, that doesn't mean it's right or true. I think among the laity and most people, they would still believe in perhaps a literal 6-day creation, but that is becoming more and more of a fringe view as we move into the 21st century. Any comments or questions on that? And once again, I'm not saying it's not a true view. I'm just want you to be aware, if you were brought up in a young earth school or church or family, that's definitely seen as an out there view now. When I went to San Diego State, I asked some of my professors about it, and they were trying to be polite, but I could tell they were looking at me like I was some sort of flat earther or something. Imagine how a young earth creationist would sound to someone who believes the universe is over 13 billion years old and the earth itself is over 4 billion. And here you have young earth creationists claiming it's more like 6 to 10,000 years old. I mean, that's not even close, right? We're not even talking about the same scenario. And so I guess that's why I was bringing it up. I just want you to be aware how people in the scientific community are going to view young earth creationism. They're just going to see it as pseudoscience and kind of like a wackadoodle medieval leftover stuff.
I think with the time, I think that's just the 6,000 years is God's time, not our time. That's how I view it, at least. Because we don't know how God views time. I mean, 1,000 years for him could be, 50 million years for us.
Possibly. I mean, we do have the scripture that says a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, but in the Genesis account, we also have a description, the evening and the morning were the first day. And that's still how we measure days today, right? That's one rotation of the earth.
Right.
And a year is one revolution around the sun. So that's how we do time, all the way back to like this Genesis account. And think of how it's even affected our culture, right? With our 7-day week. I mean, that all goes back to that Genesis creation account, at least in the West. It's had such a huge impact on the West. All right, let me keep going. When Darwinian evolution was applied to the study of anthropology, you can kind of logically infer what the conclusions are going to be. So firstly, we have primitive races are evolving towards a civilized state. And so it's not just biology, like single-celled to human beings in the tree of life, but even races can be ranked from almost animals to being fully civilized human beings. And some of these theories are going to have grades of development. And that's how they're going to evaluate different cultures, looking at where they think they fall in this spectrum. And it's that gradualism again, going from very primitive savagery all the way up to civilized, domesticated.
Does that mean that like people who believe in evolution think that there's so primitive, like quote unquote, like races out there?
Oh yes, very much so.
So like how do they define and decide who's primitive and who's not?
Thank you for the question, and it's a great lead in to our first theory, and this is called unilineal evolution.